Yeah, I think the anger out there, people who are in control of their lives aren't angry, but we're in a very disruptive time, and it feels like people are powerless. So again, back to the city, they do have power. So I'll get some pretty mean emails, as you can imagine, and it's okay. You just call the person up, and you listen to what hurt, what it is that triggered them to be so angry, and then you can agree to disagree. And always, I tell the person, you can disagree with me, you can hate me, you can not vote for me, but I guarantee you we're going to be future allies on another issue. And that's exactly what you said. Cities work because people are represented. It doesn't take a lot of money to get elected. There's no partisan politics, and you can vote the bums out very easily if you don't like them.
Hello, this is Paul Johnson. I'm with the Optimistic American. I'm here today. We're going to spend a little bit of time trying to learn about a concept that I think is important to many Americans, which is, why is it when I go to the ballot, the only thing that I have to choose between are the two people who are in front of me? I hear from people quite often that they're deeply concerned that the choices that they get they're just simply subpar. There's a new book that is a good book I recommend for any of you to read. That book is called Political Industry. It's written by a couple of people who really put a focus on why that's actually intentional, why the existing system is really meant to try to drive people towards extremes. Now, if you're going to look for what the solutions are to that, you don't have to look far. The biggest and best solution is city governments, especially the 70% of city governments that operate under a nonpartisan type system. When I was mayor, I operated in that system, and I'm also here with a very, very bright council person from Scottsdale, Arizona, Solange Whitehead, who can talk a lot about her city and what's happened in their community, but she can also talk a lot about how the nonpartisan election system inside of cities actually work. Councilwoman Solange, welcome. We're happy to have you here today.
Well, thank you. I'm certainly glad to be here.
Oh, well, okay. So here's what I'd like to start with. Okay. I'd like to start with, give me an understanding of your first race or your race for the city council. Walk me through the process.
Okay, well, I was not, I'm the accidental politician, and I think at city level, that's a lot of times how you get your elected officials. And so I'm a former preserve commissioner, and the city is home to the largest urban preserve in the country. So a third of our city is the McDowell Mountain Preserve, and the intention is to keep it that way, to keep it healthy as a wildlife habitat and accessible to all.
It's definitely a beautiful place.
Yeah, it's pretty nice.
So you run in, you decide to run for the council. You have to run in a primary at first, correct? Explain to me that primary.
Yeah, so there isn't necessarily a primary in a city. So what happens in a city is, and I'm going to just back up a little bit, city governments are different, and they are the solution. So first and foremost, I'm a proud American, but if I have a problem with what's going on in Washington, it's really hard to change. The reason cities work is because if the constituents don't like what's going on, you can overthrow the government, basically. And so that's how I ended up in politics. So we had a city council majority that wanted to build in the preserve, use tax dollars that were intended to buy and preserve other land, and then also charge a fee. So this is taking away public access of a public amenity, among other issues that I was opposed to. So my kids actually said to me, "You're not going anywhere until you protect this preserve." And the fear was that once you break the preserve ordinance, you open the preserve for all kinds of other things, hotels, pink Jeeps, you name it. And right now it's just a quiet preserve with mountain lions and a lot of hikers. So to run for city council takes almost no money, and it does take time, but you fill out a piece of paper. And each council race, there are 3 seats, And if there are more than 6 candidates, there's a primary. If there are 6 candidates or fewer, there's no primary. You go straight to the general election. So right off the bat, it's different than any other political office.
Right, because in a legislative seat, if you run, you'd start by running in a Democratic primary or a Republican primary. In this race, everybody runs against one another right up front.
At a city level, everybody's looking at the same issues. It's not some ideologies. They're looking at the preserve, they're looking at traffic, they're looking at development. They're looking at the same issues, and city council candidates have to appeal to everybody.
And so you go out and you knock on doors?
Oh, I'm the door-knocking queen.
Okay. So when you knock on doors, did you only pick Democrats, only pick Republicans,
Oh,
pick
heck no.
independents? Who do you pick?
You know, again, I woke up every day as a kid just being grateful I was American. And so I like the name of your show because we have always been an optimistic country, and we need to restore that. I don't affiliate with one party or another. So in Scottsdale, which is a beautiful city, we're all one team. We don't have districts, for instance. So I knock on whatever door I want. That's how I pick doors.
And again, that would be very different if you were running for Congress or the legislature, because in Congress or the legislature, you end up knocking only on doors inside of your party. And of course, that can be magnified by the fact that if you look at congressional districts, out of 435 congressional districts, only 35 are competitive, meaning if you only knock on Republican doors or Democratic doors in a Republican or Democratic district, you never have to face the voters on the other side. You had to face voters on the other side.
Yes, and I was the long shot. People didn't know how much energy I had, but I was, there were 3 incumbents, and then me, and I know a lot of people in Scottsdale, but there are 260,000 of us. So it was wide open who I was going to meet. And yes, and you can't limit it. It would be a terrible shame to pick one group or another. I hit almost every neighborhood. I would say I didn't do apartments because those are harder, but I knocked on every single day for months. I knocked, or 5 days a week, if not every day, I knocked on doors.
By knocking on doors of people who might have been in the other party or people who weren't in a party at all, you think that had an effect on maybe changing how you thought on some issues, or at least understanding a different perspective?
I think people are just shocked that I was standing there on their doorstep, and they would say, "Why are you here?" And I said, "Because our preserve might be developed, and we have an opportunity to protect the preserve and make sure that any future council that wants to do something in the preserve has to go to voters to get it approved."
For me, it was interesting because I knocked on Republican doors, Democratic doors. I was a Democrat at the time. I'm an independent today, but I knocked on, I was in a district that was almost 3-to-1 Republican, but it was nonpartisan. Well, when you knock on the other party's door and you talk to them, you hear a different set of issues. I heard from Democrats, they were concerned about schools and education and open space. I'd hear some of that from Republicans, but a lot more of them were talking about business and economics and the budget. And it didn't become difficult for me to begin to understand how those two things were married together. That having business that was thriving and successful gave you the ability to pay for the social programs like parks and open space and other things that people would want. Anything along that experience with you?
I find that there's just so much unity in our city. And I think there's a lot of unity in the country. So yes, the words that perhaps are different. In fact, sometimes I do a little game where I try to guess which party that person is after I am done speaking with them, because I have it on my phone. I can't get it right, but there are certain words that might be used, or the angle of the problem, but the problem and the solution across the board are almost always the same.
Okay, so this is fascinating because, again, if you ran for Congress and you ran in a highly Democratic district or a highly Republican district, you almost don't have to care about what the person on the other side thought, because I'm never going to have a general election. I'm going to have a primary that I'm going to face. But from your standpoint, you meet with anyone who calls you, regardless of their party, and you try to understand where they're coming from. And it has an effect on how you decide on issues, I would suspect.
Absolutely. I just want to say that you miss out.
I agree.
And you didn't, because you did what I do. You miss out. If you love America and you want government to work and you want public trust, you have to include everybody. And it's amazing who you find behind doors.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just an amazing human capital.
Mm-hmm.
And their ideas. My best successes at the city have been because I knocked on a door or someone called me and they told me about a problem and they suggested a way to fix it. Mm-hmm. And then we fix it.
So the voter ends up having a choice. The voter also knows they have an impact, that you kind of need to listen to them regardless of their party. But it also has another benefit, which is, I think what you're saying is, it helps you make better decisions because you're gaining the gifts that people who may not think exactly like you have to give.
Yeah, I was elected to protect this preserve,
Mm-hmm.
and we did. And in fact, 2 weeks ago, I had another success. I'm glad to talk about that. But once I got in, I thought, this is my opportunity. This is not a launching pad to some other career. Cities are about serving the constituents. They're about building trust in your government. And they're about leaving a legacy, handing off our democracy and our planet in slightly better shape to the next generation. So
I believe that so much that my hair goes up on my arms as you're saying it. I believe that's the role that we're supposed to play. We're supposed to be servants if we're involved in elective office. So there was a TED Talk the other day. I found it to be interesting. It was a woman who was talking about the different psychologies of people. And she said that there are, in her studies, her academic studies, she had found that there are really two types of thinking. One is very open to the future, very willing to accept things as they are and to look for what's possible. And she said there's another group who's more worried about the dangers that exist, and they're trying to create some controls and some protections to make certain that their children or people that they care about are safe. And she says it just so happens that each of those fit a little differently into the two ideologies that exist. But she then made the point, and I thought it was very poignant, that the parties want to take advantage of that. They want to take advantage of those two personalities and to tell them they need to be worried about the person on the other side. They need to worry about that other person because of what they will do to them. Either they're thinking way too openly or they're thinking way too closed. There was a great book I read years ago about Hamilton and Jefferson. Now, of course, they fought like crazy in the early parts of our country. But you almost couldn't imagine a country without the both of them, right? Jefferson was wide open in his thinking. He wrote those words that came in the Declaration of Independence, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. He created the Bill of Rights. And on the other hand, you had a person who was more worried about threats, Hamilton, who was saying, hey, we need a navy. We need a federal government. We need to have spending because we have barbarians at our gate and they may harm us. Without the thinking of both of those two people, this country would have been in trouble. And I find the same thing here as well. I don't think it's bad people. I don't know if you agree with this. Even in people that I dealt with at the legislature and in Congress, I didn't find there to be, in general, bad people. I found it to be a bad system that they were having to work within, that were driving them in a direction that oftentimes pitted them against one another, when if you took those same people and put them into a city environment, in a nonpartisan government environment, that wouldn't necessarily have to happen. Do you agree with that or disagree?
I mean, so my feelings about the political parties are their job is to get their best candidates elected, and then they should butt out. Because the people who get elected need to serve everybody. And so fortunately in the city, there is no political party telling me what to do.
So that's important because at Congress and the legislature, they organize in caucuses. Democratic Party organizes in one, the Republican Party in another. Now, it's fascinating there are no independents, even though independents are 44% of the country today. That's a plug for my group. But nonetheless, at city governments, do you organize in any way, shape, or form like that?
There is, I will tell you that people are very aware of people's political parties. Our city council for the first time in 12 years is very mixed. But the reason cities work is there is no political party. There's two things. And let's go back one step more. What do pretty much most Americans agree on? I would say 90% of Americans will tell you they don't like partisan politics and they hate the fact that money owns politicians, right? Well, at the city level, you have neither. Because whether or not someone's a Democrat, independent, or Republican, there's no party that you're accountable to. And one of the reasons is because there's not a lot of money needed to get elected. And so this money trap is really at the core of the problem. So again, my election, all I had to do was have an issue that pretty much 80% of the city agreed with me on and knock on doors.
Do you find that you're able to work with Republican members of the council as much as you can work with Democratic members?
There's no difference.
Right.
So I'll give you an example. We had a non-discrimination ordinance. Now, and I want to also talk about your people. People do have different viewpoints, so you have to talk to them where their concerns are. So if they're very open, that's great, but you might want to explain why you're going to put some barriers, some protections, and if they're worried, you can help show them why they don't need to be worried or what you've done to make the positives more than the negatives. So the non-discrimination ordinance in the past was very controversial. And so for those people who don't know, and I think we ended up calling it the anti-discrimination ordinance, but I kind of grew up with the NDO, non-discrimination ordinance. What we did was, what it is it says that you cannot discriminate in the city of Scottsdale against the LGBTQ community. And people don't understand that the federal government does not protect LGBTQ. So we decided we were going to put that protection in for the city of Scottsdale. We are a community city. We're a very small town, big city, and we're a tourism destination.
By the way, is it fair to say, now this might be because I was the Phoenix mayor, Scottsdale's a pretty conservative community.
We're a tax-adverse, conservative community, and we get a whole lot done that does not reflect those two things because we care and we think as one.
And just so we make sure we're clear on this, you still have to focus on your budget and balancing your budget and picking between priorities, correct?
Yes, but a government that a government that represents the community earns trust, and it's cheaper to run.
Oh, it's all about trust.
Yeah.
Everything is about trust.
Yeah.
I was listening to a speaker on business the other day, and I just thought how close it was to politics. But he was talking about in sales, it's so important that you put things like your price on the internet, that you put really a fair comparison. But he gave a series of items. But he said the whole reason for it is that the number one thing that you need in your sales is trust. I think that's the number one thing you need in politics, in business, in your personal relationships. If you don't have trust, all the rest is lost.
So right now, America's really divided, even though we agree. We agree on those two fundamental things. We don't like partisan politics. We don't like money. I think we build back the trust in government at the city level, and then we work that up. And so that's pretty much my goal every day. But just to wrap up the non-discrimination ordinance, we had maybe the right was worried about what they considered a liberal ordinance. The way we explained it to them, or the way I explained it to them, is first of all, we do want to include everybody. And this is a way to say everybody is welcome in Scottsdale. And number two, from a business perspective, corporations, sports teams, they ask before they come to your city whether you have a non-discrimination ordinance. So even if somebody really did not want to protect everybody in their community, I would say those are few and far between, there was a very strong economic reason to pass that non-discrimination ordinance. Back to your partisan question, we have independents, Democrats, Republicans on that council. It passed 7-0.
And again, you have that because of the way that they run an office. And then also when you get there, you don't organize in a caucus.
Right.
Everybody has a chance to be able to have a say. What I see with the parties is that they want choices to be binary. They want them to be binary. To them, you either have to be pro-business or you have to be pro-labor, as if you could possibly be pro-labor without being pro-business. They want you to be pro-business or pro-education, as if you could possibly be pro-business without being pro-education. They want you to be pro-God or pro-human rights, as if there's a God that doesn't support human rights. These things, they tie together. They're connected. They're not disconnected. But the parties gain their advantage by trying to polarize us, because they're really not after the large audience. They're really not after independence. In fact, they want to do everything they can to exclude independence. They're after their core constituencies and trying to drive them so that they can raise money and that they can accomplish the things that they want.
So you're talking these big ideas. Cities never talk. Well, we do have big ideas. We want to preserve a third of our city. That's a pretty big idea. We
want to make government work. That's a huge idea.
But we talk concrete issues. And it's even for those who want to be in the safety of a tribe, of a partisan tribe, at the city, they just can't do it because they care too much about their community. And at the community level, you've got to get the person in there that is listening to you and that has the skill set to do what you want done and has the ability also to bring everybody else on that council to that same decision. And so, back to the preserve issue, when you have an outside group wanting to build on a preserve, use the tax dollars intended to buy and save more land, and then gate it off, that brings the Tea Party, the Democrats, you bring everybody together. And my favorite part of that election cycle it was fun. It was a fun election. We had the Tea Party and the Democrats exchanging Facebook posts because they agreed. And even if they agreed, perhaps there were Democrats who thought the preservation of this land is so important for climate change because it's a heat sink and it protects this diversity of animals. The Tea Party very much saw it as overreach of government and misuse of public dollars. They came to they had the same opposition, they wanted the same result, and it's okay if they had a variety of reasons why.
So I think back to my days in being mayor and on the council before it. What I learned in being on the council was that I didn't want to say things or do things that would completely burn someone on the other side. So there may be an issue there were lots of issues that I cared deeply about, but I knew that there would be other issues that would come up later. What became clear to me after I ran for governor and watching the partisan system was an understanding that in that partisan system, it actually was expected that you were going to burn people on the other side, that you were going to light them on fire, because by lighting them on fire, you ignited your own base of voters, which, by the way, only makes up about 10% of the actual public. But on the council, not that we didn't have fights and disagreements and things that we didn't like about what other people were doing, but you always knew when I got this one done, there's going to be another issue, and then there's going to be another issue. So stay within the lines, and the lines are focus on the facts and the issues and the things that matter to people. What are they going to get, as opposed to personality?
Yeah, I think the anger out there, people who are in control of their lives aren't angry, but we're in a very disruptive time, and it feels like people are powerless. So again, back to the city, they do have power. So I'll get some pretty mean emails, as you can imagine, and it's okay. You just call the person up, and you listen to what hurt, what it is that triggered them to be so angry, and then you can agree to disagree. And always, I tell the person, you can disagree with me, you can hate me, you can not vote for me, but I guarantee you we're going to be future allies on another issue. And that's exactly what you said. Cities work because people are represented It doesn't take a lot of money to get elected. There's no partisan politics, and you can vote the bums out very easily if you don't like them.
So I was, when I was on the council, I think I was 24 years old.
I know, it's kind of amazing. I'm 60, but yeah.
Oh, well, you're lucky you don't look 60. I feel like my head's wore out 3 good bodies already. But in any event, I remember that people would bring me these papers to sign. So I'm sitting there signing them during the council meeting, and I'd just take care of whatever it was that they needed. And then people would bring me up more papers, and I'd go through the additional papers. At the end of this meeting, this older woman who was a Republican, I'm walking out the door, she grabs me. She goes, "I need to talk to you." She's a little tiny short woman. She puts her finger in my face. She said, she said, "I voted for you in the election and I expect more out of you." And I said, I'm sorry, I don't understand. She says, "You weren't paying attention to what we said. You weren't listening to the things that we were talking about. You were up there doing papers or playing around with something and you weren't paying attention to what we said." It was such a great lesson. I mean, it really was, because rule number 1 is, if you listen to people, you've solved a big part of the problem, right? And you don't need to tell them your opinion or your point of view unless they ask for it. We think in life that everybody wants our opinion. They don't, not even as a council person or mayor. Usually they want you to listen to their concerns. And if you can mirror that back to them, well, let me tell you what I'm hearing from you. Let me tell you what I think that you're saying. Then they know they've been heard. Then, and only maybe then, will they listen to your point of view. I don't think I would have learned that in Congress. In Congress, it's such a big body, so far removed from the public. But at the local level, that woman got right in my face, right? And she told me, I do too. It creates better leadership. The best leadership that happens is leadership that happens from having to confront people who don't think exactly like you think. Because if the idea is that everybody thinks like you think, what kind of leadership do you need? You just need to say, go that direction, everybody's going to follow. Well, that's not what our country is. That's not what our state is. That's not what our city is. It's a diversity of people, a wide variety of people, and you have to try to get them together. We only have a country, we only have a city and a state. Those are all imaginary things. They really are. They only exist because we believe in them, because we decide to make them a priority.
Yeah, listening to people is exactly right. So all the bullet points of my re-election pamphlet are successes that came to me from a constituent. And cities, the other thing I love about cities, I love cities. We can change the world, literally, because we in Scottsdale, we are setting a very, very high bar for cities all around the world to come and learn how we set aside 30%, how we take your flushed toilet and turn it into drinking water. So the policies that council passes turn into projects that are, effectively changing the world. But yet we can still be in the weeds, and I actually love being in the weeds. So one of my favorite calls, and it wasn't even a call, I just listened to our design review board meeting where developers coming in and saying, I'm going to build this road. There is an easement for 2 houses. So he's building 2 houses, and there's a road easement, and he just came in to say he's building the road, and the development review board was about to vote, but then there was a public speaker. So the public speaker came on, it was during COVID, so it was just a voice from the phone saying, if you build the road, a lot of trees are going to die. And then he hung up, and the development review board, which for those who don't know, it's citizens who serve, and the development review board approved the road, right? Uh-huh. I mean, there's a road easement, and 2 houses are going to need access, and so of course it's going to be built. So I asked staff, who's that guy? Who's the guy who says trees are going to die? So they gave me his number, and I called him up, and I said, I want to meet you at where that road easement's going in. So I biked on over, and there he was. And sure enough, there was all these beautiful ironwoods and mesquites and a saguaro that's amazing that had grown on a road easement. They didn't know it was a road easement. So I brought in the civil engineer for the guy who was building the 2 houses, and I said, hey, can you do something about the trees? He said, yeah, we can put a bend in the road, but staff didn't want a bend in the road. And if we put a little bend in the road, the trees are fine. So we called on staff, and within 4 hours, we had a bend in the road. So that's the level that a city council has the authority, has the ability to affect everybody's lives in the city, and that's what I love most.
All right. What, as a council person, was your lowest moment?
Oh, my lowest moment.
The hardest one?
That is a really good question, because I have to say I have loved being on council. I would say there was one development that you have a beloved shopping center, but you know that all the anchor stores are going to be gone. It's just, there's 2 of them, and it's just a matter of 2 to 3 years. And we had a proposal on the table that development has been fun for me. So the proposal, there are 3 things that I ask of developers. They have to, well, usually lower density and lower height, but besides that, they have to build to our strict green building standards, which were voluntary. Mm-hmm. So, and they're not minor standards. They will reduce the future electric bills for the tenants, and they produce less urban heat. So they have to build to these green standards. They have to provide a higher level of design. So in this case, it was less stucco, higher quality, building environments. And they have to provide public open space. And that's the key. Every development project that I've approved has had a perpetual public easement protecting some large space and usually a pedestrian path on the project. So that's the investment to the community. So this project had all of that, but I had to vote for it despite the fact that we negotiated for a year. We got 95% of what all the community wanted, but we still had to agree to tear down a shopping center they loved, which already Carl's Jr. was gone. I mean, it was already vacant, but that was a tough one.
You know, what I find with local government, I think the hard part of local government that's very different, I recall I went to and I had more than one of these stories, but a young boy who was valedictorian of his school that ended up being shot in a drive-by shooting. Oh. And he wasn't one of the gangs. He was literally walking on the side of the road, and he got hit. And I remember I went to the funeral, and the mom, when I got there, she was just upset, and she yelled at me, and she said, there had to be something you could have done that would have saved my son's life, and you didn't do it, right? And it was it was one of those moments like I really struggled. I was like, well, I didn't say this to her, but I was like, that's not fair, and blaming me on this isn't right. I mean, we're all human beings. We all are affected by that. The upside to it was after I thought more about it, I said, no, maybe there is more that I could have done that would have made a difference. And I tried to take accountability for myself and to say, was I doing the things that we could do? Now, I ended up calling her back about a month later, and I said, hey, I thought about this, and I think you're right, but I can't do it on my own. And as it turns out, I ended up engaging her. She started a group called Mothers Against Gangs. I passed a curfew program and a kids' gun law and a school uniform program and a series of other things trying to fight this juvenile crime. But the downside is the like you said, you went out on the curb and you had somebody move the curb 5 minutes later. The downside is you actually know people. Like they know you. Yes. They know where you live. They know your family. They know your children, your spouse. And maybe you went to school with them. There's just so much of a connection that can make it much more difficult in that way. On the other hand, that also makes it so much richer. Yeah.
And that does trigger, and good for you for helping set up that group, because, we don't currently have, Phoenix is a major city, and Scottsdale, like I said, we're really a big city, small town, or small town, big city. But during COVID, that's where we did have a lot of people who lost their businesses overnight, and homeless rises in homeless. I had one gentleman, we were able to get him to Flagstaff. He's now housed. I just got a card from him. But the businesses, the one thing cities can always do, I call us the front lines of government, is we can answer the phone. And I got so many emails from businesses, I couldn't help them, other than we kept putting staff on the phone with them to help them walk through the really difficult federal paperwork to get help. But so many people wrote to me afterwards and said, you picked up the phone. So we can, even if we can't change the federal government, we can help walk them through the paperwork, and we can simply pick up the phone and be there for them. So I really feel like that's...
I don't know if you ever read the book Seven Paradigms.
No.
It's a great book.
Okay.
It's dated a little bit now, but one of those paradigms is start with the end in mind. Think about what it is that you want in the end. And the other one that was even better was seek first to understand, then to be understood. And if you think about trying to understand what their needs are before you try to explain to them what your needs are or what challenges you're facing, once people feel that you've listened to them, it dramatically shifts their outlook and yours. And you have to tell people no in government. There's just no choice to the matter. You are the one that's set up to make choices, and those choices become yes or no's. You wish they weren't, but they become yes or no's. And there are some people who want you to vote no, and there are some people who want you to vote yes. But the key is the yes people, if you're a yes and they're a yes, they take care of themselves.
Right.
The people that you have to spend more time with are the people who you didn't agree with. One, to make certain they were heard and they were listened to. And even after it's done, to make certain that they feel like they matter. Because devaluing them or demoralizing them just simply makes it all that much more difficult for democracy to survive. Well, I love your answer. Answer the phone.
Yeah, just answer the phone. But also, the reason to listen is because it makes you smarter. In the most selfish sense, if you want to be smarter and more effective and you want your city to be better, listen, because you're going to learn a whole lot.
All right, so if you could give to your successor, whenever that happens, 3 lessons, what would they be?
The 3 things are to remember that your purpose is to serve, and that sounds corny, but it's really true. And if you serve, if you listen to the people, you'll be more effective. The government it'll cost less to run, and you'll leave that legacy. I mean, you can take one thing to the grave, and that's your honor. And at a city government, you have the ability to listen to your constituents, bring their priorities. There's a bit of a variety, but there's a lot of shared goals. Bring their priorities to City Hall and make policies that make our government work. Oh,
it's fun, isn't it?
Yeah.
Local government. All right, so now you give yours, I'm going to give mine afterwards.
Okay.
The system beyond city government. Legislatures, Congress, other election offices, other governments. If you had your ability to create reforms, what are the reforms that you would try to put into place?
Yeah, I definitely have some ideas on that. So when I first got elected, remember, I was the anti-candidate because I was coming in to change the majority and to change direction. And so I got there thinking, well, how hard can 6 people be? Turns out not very hard. And our lobbyist said, oh, those 6 people aren't your problem. It's the legislature. And so the partisan politics at the legislature are hurting the legislators. They're definitely hurting the city governments. And they're hurting Arizona's ability to be an economic powerhouse. And so the change that I would make is to have the primaries be nonpartisan for those offices, for the state Senate and the state House.
So mine would be, by the way, that's right on line with probably my top priority. In fact, I think that's the one that we need to fix the most. We really do need to create competitive elections where voters have choices. And if you get rid of the parties on that front end, not that you get rid of them, the parties should have a right to exist, candidates should have a right to take part in them, and they should have a right to go out and to lobby for whoever they like. But they shouldn't control the system. Today we subsidize them. We give the parties money to run those primary elections. We give them money to run their conventions. We're subsidizing them, and yet the majority of voters, 44% of them, are no longer in either one of them. Right? They don't control it. Second, By removing them, you begin to ensure that voters have choices on all sides, and then they can begin to make a pick. And you can have the top 2 or the top 4 that go on to the next level. There are different cities and different states that have done it different ways. But by getting rid of those parties in the front end, it's really important. The second one is to level the playing field. If you run for governor, and this is typical in most states, if you run for governor in Arizona, you need 6,000 signatures if you're a Democrat, 7,000 if you're a Republican. You need 45,000 if you're an independent, and you have less time to collect it.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's the rules are set up against them, and that again, all the rules, when you begin to look at them, they're designed by the parties to protect the parties. The one thing they can both agree on is that they want to protect that 2-party system. They've created, as the book Political Industry pointed out, a duopoly. They have control over the system, and they don't want to give it up. I also think that we have to deal with dark money from my standpoint in the country. The decision on Citizens United, which allowed unlimited amounts of money to go into government from any type of source or into political races, that's not really the biggest part of the problem. The bigger part of the problem is that at least today it can be done without attaching any names to it. People can do it anonymously. And even the most conservative justice said that's not what this was designed to do. The most conservative justice said, that democracy, it's key that people be willing to go down to the public square and talk about what it is that they care about. Well, when you can do it anonymously, people beat up other people because they're not held accountable for the things that they're saying. And today, dark money, I think, has become way too big inside the system. But it's fun because, again, the book, The Political Industry, it's a great book, but I think one of the things that it overlooks is there are a whole bunch of governments that are already doing it. They're already in that game. 70% of cities in the United States are nonpartisan cities. By the way, if you look at numbers, Congress gets in the single digits approval ratings. Legislatures usually are in about the 20s. City governments are divided. Partisan cities are in about the 20s. Nonpartisan cities across the country range between about 45 and 60% popularity. So the public already gets them. They already know that they work. And they'll work on more issues than just picking up garbage and dealing with police officers. There are a whole set of issues. As an example, the police could become a much more partisan issue in a partisan system. But in a nonpartisan system, people begin to see the neighborhood matters, as do the police officers.
Yes.
And you try to find common ground for both.
Yeah, I do agree. I'll add one more thing for the legislature and then go back to bragging about cities. Cities are just where it's at. But the legislature, whether you like your legislator or not, they need to be in there for 4 years. Having these people run every 2 years is a waste of money, and it gives everybody a headache, and they just need to stay put and do their job. And so I think that would be another big correction.
I would definitely agree with that if they were nonpartisan. If they were nonpartisan, I'd do it. The people running for election far too often can have a deleterious effect as well.
Yeah, but I'll go back to the money issue because that's a big one for me in the dark money. Someone in Scottsdale can give more money to a city council candidate. I make $18,000 a year. They can give $6,500 to me, and then their spouse can give me another $6,500. That's more than I believe you can give to a presidential candidate.
It is.
So it's ridiculous. But our voters, and I choose, and you can take money from let's say a developer who is coming forward with a big controversial project. That is completely legal. It's legal from the state's perspective, and it's legal from our ethics perspective. And you don't have to disclose that other than on your campaign finance form, but who looks at that? I choose not to. And so when I ran, again, I was the long shot, and I had the least amount of money. There was one other candidate with less money, but by a few $1,000s, and both of us won. So 2020, same thing. There was a candidate, the candidates who had the most money did not win, and that's for mayor and for council. So kudos to our voters because they're not looking at R&D, and they ignored an awful lot of money, including buses with wraps, a lot of political money being wasted, and they picked based on issues. So I love Scottsdale. That was really, I was proud.
Scottsdale's a great city. All right,
Yeah.
last question.
Okay.
I know you're an optimist just because I've known you for a while.
Yeah.
In terms of our country and our government, you're optimistic, and why?
Oh, I'm extremely optimistic because I knock on doors. If you get off social media, I always say the most dangerous
You're right
place
on social media.
Yeah, the most dangerous place in Scottsdale is nextdoor.com, okay? But if you get out and you talk to people, you cannot help but be optimistic. People are kind. They're thinking about the good of the community, and they're smart.
You know, I'm going to end with that and just say I feel exactly the same way. And being mayor and on the council for over a decade in Phoenix, and then I've been involved in presidential campaigns all over the country. The thing that makes me the most optimistic are the people. They are oftentimes much better than the representation that they get. They are people who want to make certain that things work. They believe in this country. They believe in service to this country. But in general, they also just want to know that their schools are going to work, their trash is going to be picked up, the police officer is going to arrive when they want to have them arrive. And if you do that in a nonpartisan basis, you're bound to do it in a much better way.
Yeah. And they really care about people. You just watch people when they don't know they're being watched. People care about people. And we cannot fail when we have that. That's very important to me.
Well, Councilwoman, thank you so much for being here today. We appreciated you being as part of our program.
Okay. Well, it's been my pleasure.
All right. Thanks.